Good morning, good morning, good morning. I mean, Tavi's so young, he doesn't really know this, but 16 years ago I wrote a long essay called Estonia is a Nordic country. But he's so young, he doesn't know that. I don't know if he knew how to read then. On the other hand, I'm so old that I learned to code 47 years ago. I'm 60. So, and that was actually one of the reasons why I, long ago, but 20 years ago, started some of the stuff that was going on here, because I realized that if I learned to code at 13, and I was, and then you show how much of a dinosaur I am, is that when I was in university or college, I was programming in assembler on a PDP-8, which no one knows what it is, but anyway, it's a 8K memory DEC computer, which is about 1.5 meters by 1 meter. But you had to code an assembler because it had no memory, so you had no option. But anyway, so let me talk about this because it is really close to my heart. And say why the Nordic countries, and I'll come back to this at the end, but basically I would say that for development, I mean, rather than looking at it just geographically, what you need to have in order to be a modern society today requires, in addition to all the good progressive things that we have as modern societies here in Europe, you also need to have a minimal level of technological hardware and software, and that hardware and software is not simply the technological software, but it's also your legislation, your willingness to do things, to apply solutions to broader issues, and unfortunately, purely empirically, that willingness exists more or less only in this region. I mean, there are isolated cases. I would say Catalonia is another one that is doing quite interesting things. And you don't have to remain stuck for long, sort of in the old days, because you look at something, you look like a place like Portugal that has taken real leaps and bounds. So it's not necessarily regionally defined. On the other hand, what we can say, again, empirically, is that the range of countries we're talking about actually do have the prerequisites to actually move a step beyond where we are today, and this, or where some of us are and the rest of you aren't. But there have been also, I would argue, there have been earlier cases of this region doing things, and I would say that should be, to begin with, just to put things in perspective, and the way I think we should proceed is that back in the 1980s, it was just this region, then we were still enslaved, but in any case, it was the Nordic countries that led in introducing the mobile network, and then in the 1990s, the GSM standard, which is all over the world today. And so when you hear these people say, oh, well, the Americans are doing this or someone else is doing that. Well, in fact, the fact that GSM is used the world over is actually a result of cooperation among a fairly small group of countries with a fairly small population. It's that the thing that they won with, you won with, was that it was better, right? I mean, and then the standard was taken over by everyone else. And I think that should be the model for our thinking in the things that we talk about today. We here have done quite a bit, and I will outline some of the fundamental principles of what we've done, not so much brag about everyone who's copying us, but there are a lot of countries who are taking over what we're doing. We've had over 100 countries come here to study what we're doing. Countries such as well, we have given as a form of our foreign aid instead of money. Well, we do that too, but I mean, in addition to the money, we actually give away our open source, non-proprietary platforms to countries that want to use digital solutions, and in fact, they are today in operation to varying degrees in the Palestinian Authority in Tunisia and in Moldova. Myanmar wants to do it. But it's not just developing countries that are doing it today. In fact, we see in the UK, the government office, having had a number of unpleasant experiences, decided that they'd look around, and a very skeptical British minister came here 2 years ago or a year and a half ago and said, all right, all my staff says I have to keep coming here. And then he actually spent 3 days here, and he said, we'd actually like you to send a guy over for a month or two to second him, as it were, to use the term. And so we said, sure, and 12 months later, he was still there. And today, we see that, in fact, they are now doing what we're doing on a pilot form. Now, what I would say is that that's the background. Where we can move to the next step, I will argue, is that if we actually pool our resources, less our resources, I just say our brains, we can in fact create here a model of doing things that first and foremost will make the lives of our citizens much better. But after that, if it works, and I'm convinced it will, because in some cases it already does, but if we can actually do or replicate what happened with GSM 20 years ago, then this will become a standard for the world. So what I want to do here today is actually focus on e-government, which is something I would say has been our strong point, is the use of IT in governance, which, well, is not so common in the world these days. Aside from us, I think only Singapore has done it to the same extent. But we have very high-tech societies here. The other countries in the Nordic region have not used these capabilities to the same extent. And I would argue that this would be more or less the Estonian contribution to thinking about these issues conceptually, and then we'll see where it goes from there when it comes to the actual implementation. Certainly, we have certain basics already here. I mean, by far the highest use of the internet in Europe is in this region. And that's not simply the region as has been thought of for the past 20 years. Certainly, I mean, in a country like Estonia, which is not always thought of as being there by, say, our neighbors that were outlined here by Taavi Kotka. But we are, I guess we're number 2 in mobile phone penetration in the world. Certainly the OECD ranks us as number 1 in the world in terms of healthcare services online. As I said before, I mean, aside from Singapore, and when it comes to e-governance, we really don't have any competition at this point. On the other hand, I always say this when Estonians feel good about it, I say, that can change in half a year. So this is an issue you have to keep on working on. You can't rest on your laurels ever on IT. But I guess, speaking to Nokia, you already know that, right? Okay. So what we have done is look at the issues that what we face in this new digital world. And the digital world, I'd say, has, especially after Snowden and those revelations, has come to actually understand that there are things we must address, and they must be addressed in ways where it's not necessarily the private sector that can do this. And what I would argue is that there are certain things that we need to do, and I will go through that. The first thing is trust. Why is trust so important? Well, mainly because it's so abused in the internet, and when you don't have the fundamentals down, it's very easy to actually do that, to abuse that. And I would argue that, and I do argue, in fact, that the fundamental issue Kus on Epp? The fundamental issue that we have to address in all cases in the future is the problem of identity. And this is a classic caricature or cartoon from 1995 for the WIPO people, paid for, by the way, so we can show it to you. But this is the problem of identity. If you do not know who you're talking to, if you do not clearly, or if you're not legally and technologically identifiable, then you cannot proceed with e-governance, you cannot proceed with anything really. And the solution to this is technological and not very difficult. But on the other hand, it has to be accepted by society, it has to be accepted by governments. But basically, that is the fundamental issue. If you do not know who the other side is, then you really don't know if it's a dog or if it's a person, if it's a hacker. When someone is trying to get into your system, if you do not know who it is, well, you're in trouble. A company or a bank that is dealing with a customer must know who it is. Companies, we all, I mean, most of us here, I assume, use various solutions to buy things. I mean, I do all the time from Amazon. But frankly, you know, the solutions that currently exist with, what do you have on a credit card? You have to put in a 3-digit CVC security code. I mean, are you serious? I mean, every time we go and buy something online with the current level of security that exists there, you're taking a risk, a gamble, because you don't know, first of all, if you're actually getting the right site, and the site doesn't know if you're you and what's going on. So the whole current level of passwords, security codes and 3 digits will, I predict, disappear anyway, because it's not trustworthy, you don't know who it is, and more broadly, when we come to any kind of government services, this becomes crucial and clear. What we have done here, both technologically, which is not such a, I mean, it's not that innovative, aside from the fact that we use it everywhere, is that we've solved the fundamental problem of the internet using a 2-factor PKI, or public key infrastructure, at RSA 2048, encryption, for those of you who know what that is. But when we talk about RSA 2048, then recall that last year the US company LavaBit decided to voluntarily go bankrupt because that was where Mr. Snowden encrypted his data and kept his data, and they were at 512. And so RSA 512, which is 8 times 2 to the third, lower encryption than what we offer here, could not be broken by the NSA at that time. Now, of course, all of this will change over time. Our prediction is, based on Moore's law at least, that we can continue with RSA 2048 until about 2035, 2040, though we are looking at other methods to solve this. Now, this is something that we provide to all Estonians, that is to say, all residents of Estonia and citizens of Estonia living abroad. In fact, we require you to have this number associated with you and a card that includes the encryption that you need, the PKI. At this point, which is really the first thing we need in order to have government services. These keys that we use in PKI are generated by the government, but the certification is not done by the government, but by an independent body. So basically, we try to eliminate some of the sort of Big Brother Snowden fears through that. And this is a technological solution to a secure online identity that so far has not been breached technologically. I mean, there are other ways of doing it as well, but those people, so far, the one breach we've had, the person's gone to jail. But this is step one, if you're going to have an e-governance. Associated with this, not only that you offer this, but you actually have everyone in society using it. This is the non-technological side of the issue. When I said before, there's like the software and the hardware. This is the hardware stuff. The software stuff is that actually people use it, and more importantly, that you have the legal basis to do things with it, which leads to the next step, which is a digital signature law. Now, a digital signature law actually has existed in the European Union for almost 15 years. Ma võib-olla paneks praegu selle video. And to explain how it works, rather than go through the whole thing myself, I'll show you a little video, a very short video. But basically, a digital signature law is a law that says that a signature digitally...
There are times when old-fashioned solutions don't meet...
I'll say when. A digital signature law basically says that a signature that we've been doing ever since whenever, since we came up with this, you write your signature, has legal force. This is the basis of a contract, of any contractual relationship. Well, just as good is a digital signature based on the system that I just talked about with a unique identity guaranteed by the government. And once you have that you actually have a digital signature and you use it, because there are, as I said, legally it exists in the European Union since 2000 or so. It's just that very few countries actually use it or even accept it, even if they have the law. And also, they don't have the technological infrastructure to use it. And on top of that, no one, in fact, in the private sector really knows anything about it and doesn't use it either and still uses paper, or rather pen and ink solutions. But this is how it works. I should say, and I'll bring this up later, but what you're about to see, we have also signed the first ever international agreement between two governments using this. What it is that we signed, I'll tell you about later, but in any case, this is the first time it was used, and it was only last December when an agreement was signed between Finland and Estonia with the Finnish Prime Minister Jyrki Katainen sitting in his office in Helsinki and the Estonian Prime Minister sitting in his office up here on the little hill. It was done in a matter of seconds. And the whole point of this, you'll see in the video that's about to begin now. I think the volume is a little high.
There are times when old-fashioned solutions don't meet our modern demands, like signing documents and contracts with a pen and paper. Today's digital world demands a more flexible and responsive solution, like digital signatures. Let's take Filippo, whose business partner is based abroad. Whenever they need to countersign documents in the course of their work, it can end up taking them weeks to get a deal done because of all the paperwork being physically sent back and forth. It's such a waste of time. Now, if Filippo and his business partner used digital signatures, they could close their deals in a matter of minutes, not weeks. They'd only need to select a document, right-click it, sign digitally using their secure PIN code, and then send it off by email. The process is completely paperless, and in the European Union, a digital signature is just as valid as one made with ink. But it gets even better. With the mobile ID, Filippo can sign documents, make bank transfers, and more, all from his mobile phone. Wherever he happens to be, and with whatever papers he needs to sign, whether they're for business or other legal purposes. Studies have shown that using a digital signature helps to save an equivalent of 1 whole working week per year for every working age adult. Just stop and think for a minute what you could do with a whole extra week of time. Or take the environment. If in a small country like Estonia, which is a pioneer in the technology of digital signatures, it's been found that a stack of paper as high as the Eiffel Tower could be saved every month. Imagine how much it could do to reduce the waste for other, larger European nations. Digital signatures benefit everyone, from common citizens and enterprises and all the way up through governments. It raises productivity and efficiency, helps to reduce our impact on the environment, and establishes a uniform digital market in Europe.
Okay, thank you. Now this is, as I said, so far we're at the level of no-brainers, actually. I mean, none of this technology is really that amazing. What is a little more amazing is the willingness to actually apply these technology in the way a country or a government works. And in fact, in the European Union, alas, have not done the minimal work of having an ID card with a smart chip, that they would provide a secure online identity. Services are not offered online, partially because of fears about security that you could be eliminated by the signature law. Doctors in most countries still add their signature on a paper prescription. Contracts are still signed on paper. And very few countries actually have government or private sector services based on the digital signature or the law of contracts that applies to the digital world. We, on the other hand, have issued about 1 million IDs. We use them every day. We have signed about 140 million documents digitally in this country since we brought it out. Because of this, we have virtually all Estonian prescriptions are done online. People just don't use paper prescriptions anymore, and so forth and so forth. Now, the other side of this is that it does change the legal and political environment in your country to actually go this far before we get to bigger and better things. Which is that, and people always ask me, well, do you trust the government? Is the government really the one who's supposed to be doing this? And I would say, well, who's better? And I would argue that without a digital signature, without a firm digital ID, then the various cases of hacking are really due to irresponsible governments and irresponsible companies. Because if you have a bank that writes off money stolen electronically, if you have a power company that says that we were hacked and therefore we had a power failure, it is an act of God, those are two cases of market failure. The market is not working if it relies on solutions that are so weak today. And if the market is using weak solutions, then they are to blame because the solutions exist. Therefore, and so what we have done in this country is actually say, okay, the government will do this. And to reassure people about Big Brother, we have the identities confirmed by a separate non-governmental entity. But the case is that unless you solve these issues, you're not going to go very far anywhere when it comes to an e-governance and e-services society and economy. Now, so far, it's kind of elementary. And this is what we use here, and this is a little chip there, and we just plug it in where we want, and we cannot, by the way, you probably do know that we also vote online using this for 3 elections in a row. Already over the past 6 years, 4 elections, sorry, we have had 25% of votes cast were done online, which also, again, gives an example of how you can solve issues because a little country like Estonia doesn't have consulates and embassies all over the world, but we basically had votes cast in about 100 countries in our last elections because people just can log on online and vote. Now, where it gets interesting, however, is in the next step, which is the kind of architectural. It is no longer providing a digital signature and a firm identity. But once you have the the secure identity, the question is, how do you build up on this? And basically, in what I would call a strong case of serendipity, which is looking for one thing and finding something else, back in the early 2000s, we were already being very sophisticated digitally, but basically Estonia was a rather poor country. The Finnish Minister of Defense recently said Estonians have to join NATO because they're too poor to have their own planes. Well, I don't know if we go that far, but certainly in our case, the problem was that we couldn't build a, chairman of the Defense Committee. We just didn't have enough money to have one big server, and we'd already invested enough servers in all the various agencies that could handle the work of the agencies, of the ministries. The idea of buying a big server was rather daunting financially, so we figured, how do we connect these things? The solutions already existed again. The creativity was not involved in the technology. The creativity was, in fact, involved in applying it. And so we basically did a distributed, using a distributed enterprise service bus to connect up all of the various agencies and ministries. And basically all it is simply is that all the various databases, all of the various, the car registries, criminal records, health records, dental records now, they're all there, all connected with each other. But the basis of connection to make sure that you you're not stealing anything is, again, the use of the identity, because we know who's talking to whom. I mean, this is how we do our banking. This is, unless you, like me, use Safari, because our Estonian banks haven't figured out Safari. But in any case, so if I want to look at my health records, I log on to look at my health records. Well, that may be kind of boring. On the other hand, if we go a step further, and this is the kind of thinking we do in all areas, is that, well, okay, my health records are there. I have access to my health records. My doctor, who I've assigned, has access to my medical records. And then he tells me I have some problem and I have to go for an operation next week. So I'm a little dubious, and I go, well, there's this rule, always get a second opinion. Well, what do? All I do is authorize another doctor to look at my health records and say, why don't you look at what's going on? And I can do this I get a third opinion and a fifth opinion. I can get a 200th opinion. All of these kinds of solutions become possible when you have this kind of system. Already now we're on a two-layer system. Since we have the identity, and then we have the distributed enterprise service bus system that allows communication between persons, the private sector, government services, private services, your car registration, your land registry. All of these things are connected in this way, but they are always done through the system, through using the RSA 2048 based PKI. Now, so what we have done is created this system, which is used massively by Estonians. But this is not enough. There's one more step to take to make all of this work and make life much simpler for the citizens, though I admit this is already pretty good for the citizens. But that is, you pass a law that's saying the government may never ask you for any information it already has. Now, I don't know, back in the old days, every time I had to deal with the government, I had to write in my name and my address, my telephone number. Well, we passed this law saying you can't do that. If the government has that information already, based on your ID, it knows it has that information. So I never, ever have to go through filling out all those forms again. It's kind of like this government-provided autofill for everything that it already has. How does this work practically? It works practically, I'll give you an example, is that in Estonia, thanks to this system and the requirement to only do things once or not to take any new information, is that if you want to register a company, you have to provide all the usual stuff, the board of directors, the addresses, their home addresses, proof, then you have to, the government then processes this, looks at, Do you owe money? Have you gone bankrupt? Have you paid your alimony? Do you have a criminal record? This is standard in all countries. What happens is, and if you look at, based on EU law, basically the same procedures are followed whether you are an Estonian company or you're in Italy, an Italian company. Registering a company in Italy, thanks to the paper-based system they still have, takes 18 months. You want to register a company, you go there, you provide all the documents, it goes to one ministry, they look through everything, yes, he's paid all his alimony, goes to the next ministry, yes, no, he has not been in jail, goes to the third ministry, and all of this long process of taking all of these things, going from ministry to ministry, having it all looked through, being at the bottom of a pile of papers that takes forever to go through, it takes 18 months, and then you get, assuming everything is okay, and you're not Silvio Berlusconi, it takes you 18 months. In Estonia, the same procedure, because of what we have here, takes 18 minutes. You want to register a company in Estonia? Based on providing the IDs, secure identities of the people involved, it's done. There's an additional benefit. Since it's all done via software and there are no people involved, you don't have the problem that you have in a lot of countries, and I won't mention them to be polite, but a lot of countries where in order to get anything done, you have to go slip them a certain amount of money, yes. So we don't have, my line is you can't bribe a computer. And so the more processes, all of these processes I would call are non-discretional processes. Non-discretional means there is no discretion for anyone to make a decision on it. You fill all the requisite categories, you get that. So basically, registering a company is an example of this. All the checks that are done on registering a company that will take on paper 18 months, those are done, and there are no options, there are no steps in the way where some official in some ministry says, well, look, I could move this a little faster if you want, if you slip me the right number of rubles. Excuse me. Or any other currency, actually. Unfortunately, I can say this also exists in the Eurozone, but I won't mention those countries. Okay, so that's the next step. You can actually, based on these legal changes, expand dramatically the range of services that you offer, speeding things up and reducing corruption. This is not necessarily transparency, because no one actually sees what's going on, but you can see every step of the way if you really want to look at it. But the point is that once you have secure identities and you have this distributed system and you have this law, suddenly the possibilities for government to be efficient, open, transparent, uncorrupt expand exponentially and through a very high exponent. Okay, so when we move on to that, then the next question is, well, you have all these databases. What can you do with all these databases? You can do a lot of things with a lot of databases, health databases. If you read Maya Schoenberger's book on big data, it's full of all kinds of wonderful things you can do if you have big data. We have a wonderful idea here using that proposed by Taavi Kotka, but that unfortunately, unless you have a technological solution, is unconstitutional, which is looking at the data of all companies and their tax returns. You can do all kinds of brilliant things with that. But the next step is to actually look at this is genuinely an Estonian invention, which allows to compare big data without knowing whose it is. And this is going to be the big problem in Europe, I would argue, because I did just chair the European Commission's steering group on cloud computing. And one of the biggest issues here is that that if you have the cloud, will it be available to people for doing research on the big data that is stored there? And of course, especially after Snowden, there's a huge amount of fear involved in all this. But here we do have, the next solution is to actually look at these, come up with algorithms that allow you to look at data which in fact can be compared, but you never know whose data you're looking at. And the basis of this, or actually to understand what we're talking about, I won't get into the nitty-gritty of this, is that we have one big problem in the world, you probably know, or actually extraterrestrial problem, which is that we have thousands and thousands of satellites moving around in the world, around the world. And these are often government satellites, and whatever they're doing, we don't really know. No country ever wants to say what it's going and where it's going to be. On the other hand, with so many satellites, there's this constant problem of collisions. So how do you, in fact, regulate or know about potential satellite collisions if the US government, the German government, the French government, the Russian government, the Chinese government do not say what the trajectories or what the paths are? No one wants to say it. On the other hand, no one wants to really come up with this, no one really wants to see their multi-million-dollar satellites crash with another one. And so we actually have come up with a solution here, which is called ShareMind, in which actually you can compare all of the data, but you never know whose it is. You just know that these data are real and that you can avoid, say, a collision of satellites because the data has been not only anonymized, but in fact you can, one step further, which is that you sort of can allow more important data to be compared. And so this is the next sine qua non. Again, it requires legal solutions, not technological solutions, but in fact, if you want to do serious epidemiological research or any kind of medical research, which is probably the most sensitive for your citizen, but looking at other data as well, such as corporate data, you need to come up with a system by which you compare data but never know whose it is. And so this takes us much further, and we can compare big data. Now let's come back to the Nordic region here. In fact, if we want to look at healthcare across the Nordic region, where there at least is a willingness among the citizens to do something like this, then you need this kind of technology that would allow you to look at healthcare data in Estonia, Finland, especially the alcoholism rates in those two countries. And then, guys, no one laughs at my jokes here. I mean, I didn't mean to pick those out. I mean, there's also Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. I mean, we do have certain things in common besides the digital side of this. It's also the per capita consumption of alcohol. And now I'll get a final step that you can take in all this in my sort of purported vision of where we can go is we have, since Snowden, been focusing on privacy, which is very, very important. Another way of privacy is confidentiality, right? No one can see what you're doing. That's our big fear. We're all hung up on 1948 and 1984. I mean, 1984 being written in 1948. Big Brother looking at, and every bohemian poet across the world thinks that the NSA is poring over his emails. I mean, most of us here, I assume, know that deep packet inspection is not something that the NSA is involved in unless you're already very suspicious. But anyway, there's this widespread idea of people looking at your data everywhere. And it's not only NSA, it's SORM in Russia, and it's GCHQ, and everyone is supposedly looking at us. All right, I agree, that's a problem. I would argue that what has been completely overlooked in all of this is the issue of data integrity. Now, I may get really upset that someone has looked at my medical records. This is ruining my privacy. Terrible, I agree. However, I'm not worried yet about what the implications of that are, other than the epistemological implications, that someone knows that I have, say, Rh negative. It gets pretty existential, however, when if you don't have data integrity, and instead you have, where someone can change your data. And that is the real problem, I would argue, in the future is not going to be just confidentiality, but data integrity, because if someone can change your blood type in your records from Rh negative to Rh positive, and you end up getting a transfusion based on what your medical records say, then you're dead. Now, we can take any kind of record in this case, but I'm just taking the extreme case of medical records being altered. The same thing has to do with banks, transactions, you name it. Okay? All of this is I would argue, is going to be the real problem in the future. And so in addition to all the other things I said we need, what you actually do need to have is a guarantee that every bit of data that you store either in the cloud or that you have somewhere is identifiable as having integrity, of not being changed. And so one other solution we have come up with here is a keyless signature. That is to say, it's not as elaborate as PKI. It doesn't have a key, but it is a tag. Fundamentally, it's a tag based on every data bit, guaranteeing that the particular data point has not been altered. And I would argue that this is also will be a sine qua non for any future kind of cloud anywhere, because you have to know that when you put your data up there, it is not only secure because you put it up there with a PKI clear identification, but even then, no one has been able to get in there to change it. So we have done this here. We've actually adopted a keyless signature infrastructure for Estonian government, for the Estonian government to guarantee that our long-term data records have not been altered. Because ultimately, this whole system I'm trying to construct here theoretically must have also that kind of integrity. Now, let's look at some practical applications of this system, which is healthcare, I think. I also chaired the EU task force on e-health. We have a big problem up here in the Nordic region. We're not reproducing very much. Not enough. For a Malthusian world, we don't want to reproduce too much because then there's no food, but we're not reproducing enough. One of the implications of the low population growth rate in our region is that our demographic patterns are changing and more people are old. Being Nordic, however, we also are better at healthcare, and so the problem is that people are, not only are there more and more old people because we have fewer and fewer children coming, the old people are living longer and longer and not becoming pensioners, and that means that the cost of health care is going to go way up. Everyone talks about Bismarck developing the pension system in Germany 140 years ago, and this being the basis of the entire modern world's pension system. This is true. It was a brilliant move. On the other hand, the pension age that he picked, or that was picked at the time, was basically your lifespan. So you didn't really have big costs associated with it. But today, if you're retiring at 65, Sweden 67, France 60, and you're going to live another 30 years because of the rise in quality, and you have fewer people paying taxes that will keep it up, then we're basically all going to be Greece in 20, 30 years. Whether we like it or not, we cannot sustain this current level. So what we need to do I would argue, and what I argued with the European Commission in task force, is that we actually have to go over to new models of healthcare that would actually become healthcare. Because of what we've had up to now, I would argue, is sick care, that you go see the doctor when you feel bad, which basically eliminating the costs once you feel bad is much more expensive than keeping your costs down when you get treated in time. So I mean, I'll take a typical example. I mean, if you get, well, take this example. Why do married men or cohabitating men live longer than men living alone? It's because they have a non-electronic monitor close by. And that monitor is saying, you look kind of bad today. I think you should go see a doctor. And so before you have that heart attack, or before you have the congenital heart failure, or whatever it is that gets you, you go see a doctor and he says, whoops, caught that in time. We better do this right now with you. If you're living alone, you don't have that. Well, today we have something better than a cohabitating partner, at least more effective in this regard. And this regard is monitoring your healthcare. You can, in fact, you can monitor and have constantly monitored online all kinds of factors, everything from the level at which you're sleeping, which is a good predictor of congenital heart failure, to your blood pressure. It's all there. It's all possible. And the idea is that, especially for countries like ours, with large rural areas, with people with very low population density, is that, in fact, I think the future is that we would start monitoring people constantly. There are all kinds of technologies that exist today for monitoring all these various health factors, and this would then, the monitoring would be sent over the internet to wherever it goes. It could be sent to, for all I care, I don't know, Asia, but something, the data are there, constantly being monitored, and they say, okay, Jan Jalgratas in Abia-Paluoja, which is a very remote and sparsely populated area, or sort of local community in Estonia, and someone can say, oh, this guy there, living in this farm named Arma, his heart rate is getting kind of weird. We better go see what's going on. And we can do all of this long before that guy there collapses. So now we already do have in the Nordic area our comprehensive health data that allows us to do all kinds of epidemiological work on disease predictions, but now we can also move on to monitoring. And so I think this is the way to go. Now, where the next step is how do we move from having all of this done on a national level? The national level is, okay, we have our system here. The Finns and the Swedes and the Danes have something pretty good, not as good as ours, but nonetheless it's pretty good, and better than everyone else's. The question is, how do we connect these? Or do we want to connect these? Well, one argument I would say is that, which we are in fact right now, beginning for the first time with Finland, first time in the world, I mentioned before, first time ever digital signature was signed by the two prime ministers. Well, in fact, what we are doing is the first time in the world, which is we are actually developing a interoperable system of services. Well, to be chauvinistic and nationalistic, I say, actually the Finns are adopting our system, which is we're using our database exchange level, but you are extending it to the Finnish population so that you have the same system there. What does that mean in practice? It means that if you are visiting from above, from Lapland, you come to Saaremaa, because that's the equivalent for us of going to Lanzarote, and you're in Saaremaa, and you've had a wild night out there, and you've lost your medicine. And you wake up in the morning, perkele, where is it? And then, and you say, whoops, I better get my medicine. You call your doctor, and you say, I lost my medicine. He says, you fool, you're drinking again. And you say, well, okay. And he said, all right, and then you go to, the doctor goes to the computer up there in Rovaniemi and types in, you know, whatever it is you need to take. And then you go to any pharmacy in Estonia and you say, here I am, here's my card. And they say, oh, you need here it is. Okay, this is how much it'll cost. Now, let's expand this idea. I mean, ultimately, as I said when I led the EU Health Task Force, I said, this is something we do in all of Europe. Today, I've gotten to the point where I don't think it's going to happen in all of Europe unless it happens somewhere fairly, I mean, sort of in some place where, and it can be shown that it works. And of course, the natural place to do this, where we have already begun to do this, is between Estonia and Finland. We can move on. I mean, health records. You get, I mean, okay, you've taken your medicine, but, you know, that hangover just isn't going away. So you go to a doctor in Saaremaa, and you give him your card, and he looks, and he sees your health record. Okay, Estonia, Finland, you can more or less figure out what they're saying in the future, or maybe in the future. I mean, my vision again is that if you are from Estonia, you get sick in Athens, and you go to a doctor in Athens. He can't read Estonian, so but he puts it in, and I mean, this is kind of a no-brainer today. I mean, all if you do is if a standardized medical record with everything there, it's automatically translated, and you see, oh, you have this problem. All of this is possible if we end up having an integrated system of this type. Now, I don't think it's going to happen with much of Europe, as I said, for a long, long time. We are taking the first steps here between Estonia and Finland. I would argue that what we really should do, and in fact, I think we should be doing it in the framework of the Baltic Sea Strategy, which is an EU program, is actually do it in the Nordic area. The whole region should be doing this. We could do it with everybody and anybody, but I think that the psychological and sociological preparedness to adopt responses like this is available here and not very much elsewhere, for one. And secondly, the minimum technological bases also exist up here. That is, other countries, they could, even if they felt good about having this kind of cooperation, cannot do it because they don't have the technological hard and software basis for doing it, which include the, as I started off, the digital signature, the data exchange level, a layer that I talked about. All of these things exist in our region. And as with the iPhone, the technological solutions existed all 10, 15 years before it actually came out. The innovation in the iPhone was not technological. Whoops. The innovation was actually understanding that all of these things should be put together and be offered to the consumer, because the consumer bought it up immediately because even if it was old technology, it was something completely new and something completely different. And that's what I would hope you guys all do in the Nordic area. And if anyone has any questions or no time for questions.
Thank you. Big hand for the President. So we will fit in some questions because, again, quite a few colleagues have come from quite far, so it's a good chance to have a bit of discussion too, right? Not just us talking. So be ready. We can get two from the crowd. But I will start with one thing on my behalf to give you time to think. So you outlined the vision as well as the roadmap, really. And we have been talking, and you have been talking to, let's say, the Nordic colleagues in governments about this as well. So what has really been the reaction or response so far? So meaning, how big is still the challenge to go for the roadmap implementation to start?
Well, fairly large, but there's attitudinal. It's not an issue of technological development. It's attitudinal. As Tavi showed here, kind of saying, yeah, you know, Estonia, I mean, you know, do we really, I mean, can it be that the Estonians actually have a better idea than we do? One of the reasons why, one thing that'll work is that it's cheaper. And in fact, why it is, one of the main reasons why this is working, why we're moving ahead with Finland, was that they realized they wanted a solution of this type, but they were going to spend a huge amount of money on it. I mean, to buy proprietary closed software from the United States, when they realized that there was better non-proprietary open source software used in Estonia, and they could probably basically get it for about, I don't know, 5% of the cost. And so being sort of rational, they said, let's look at the Estonian solution, overcome our attitude that those little brothers down there don't really know what they're talking about. And then they discovered that it was in fact better than the US sort of almost €1 billion program. But it is attitudinal. I mean, because I've talked to people in the Nordic area, and they're kind of like, well, okay, but does it really work, and, you know, all of that stuff. I think that's changing, especially because we've seen the UK, of all countries, take a very active interest in this, and they're in the middle of a pilot program testing exactly what we have done. So I think there are strong possibilities, and as I said, now with the agreement, the international agreement between Estonia and Finland to proceed in this regard. But it's going to be a process because, okay, let's say we come up with one service that is in fact, say, first, what's easiest is taxes. Everyone wants to make sure that people are paid taxes. We have a lot of companies that have assets and income from both sides, and there are all kinds of possibilities for playing around with that if you have an Estonian, Finnish mother and daughter company and so forth. So the tax people are clearly interested. Well, then the service, you want to do something for people, so the prescription thing is a good thing if we get there, but there's still all kind of arbitrage issues because some things are cheaper here and some things are more expensive, and if you want to get medicine, hey, maybe I'll take the boat over to Estonia and buy this stuff up there. I mean, all these issues, but that's all soluble.
Right.
But then when you move on and on and on to all kinds of other services,
yep,
it's always a political decision. It is not a technological issue.
And I guess today is also a small attempt to sort of, again, bring this attitude change about, right? So, do we have 2 questions from the crowd? Guys, girls,
this is a Nordic audience. See, if you go somewhere south, then all the hands are up. But in Nordic audiences, first of all, people don't sit in the front row, and secondly, and the audiences fill up from the back, and then no one asks a question until there's a question, and then after that, then they start rolling.
Flow starts, right? But we do have the first brave, I believe. Can we get the mic there?
Hello. Hello. I'm interested to know, of all the technology platform that you've built.
Hello.
I'm here.
Stand up, please.
So, of all the technology
and you
platform,
are?
I'm Jordan Hatch from the UK government.
Good to have you. Come on.
So, of all the platform that you've built here, how much of it was built in-house in the government, and how much of it was procured to suppliers?
Well, most of it was built by the private sector. I mean, we're not in the business of hiring, except for security issues. We're not really in the business of hiring computer programmers or software developers. What we do is we have an idea, or someone comes to us and say, we have an idea, and then we do the procurement process. And it is actually, I mean, it's the private sector. It's also, I mean, I would say sociologically it's private sector driven because the private sector sees how much better this is than, well, let me take the case of banks. If everyone in this region used this system, the PKI system for their credit cards, we'd have a lot less credit card theft. The problem is that since it doesn't have acceptance in other governments, then banks don't use it, and so we have to rely on the more primitive and easily hacked versions of credit cards that we do. But anyway, the solutions come from the private sector.
Thank you.
And that is exactly the reason why there's the exhibition area outside, right? Do we have the second one? Last one? Yes, please. So yeah, and please say where you're from and...
I'm Hanna Niemkars from Helsinki, working at Forum Virium Helsinki, and I've been 3 days spending in Estonia now, like visiting, having presentations from your companies here, and we're really impressed with the work you're doing here. But it would be nice to hear which solutions are you looking into copying from the other Nordic countries. Where are we ahead?
So what do you think? What has impressed you?
Well, we are, in fact, I mean, this is the diplomatic answer. I mean, because frankly, the solutions have not been very good, and 1.2 million identities, if you recall, were stolen from the bank-based system that Denmark and Sweden used last June. I mean, given that there are, between Denmark and Sweden, there are about, what, 14 million people, 15 million, 1.2 identities were stolen. It's not a very secure system, so that means if at the most fundamental level it's not working, I would say that we don't want to copy that. In Finland actually is implementing the same system as we have. The real issue is getting from 75,000 ID cards up to 5.5 million. Now, we can go to mobile solutions, and that might be an easier way of doing that. But in any case, when it comes to government services, I would say the real issue is looking at the government services that in many cases are better in the Nordic countries than here, and then trying to look at a solution-based, an IT solution that would then offer those solutions. Because the level of services provided by the governments of Finland, Sweden, and Denmark are vastly superior to the quality and level of services offered still in the paper world to what we have in Estonia. We have a long way to go there in most cases. I'm not saying we're completely backward, but basically you've been doing the social democratic, social welfare stuff since 1935. It seems to work. We've been doing it only since independence. Even if we have right-wing governments, they tend to basically do kind of social welfare-y Nordic things. But what we have done is found an IT approach. So I think the cooperation actually should come in the area, looking at the quality and level of services offered in the Nordic countries, and then working together to come up with a solution to them. One concrete area is that, in fact, the new version 6.0, I guess, of the X-Road, of the data exchange level, is being developed jointly between Estonia and Finland. It is open source, non-proprietary, as I mentioned, but the idea is that now both countries will be working to develop it, which will certainly make it, I bet, much better and more robust.
Okay, so one more. Personal request from the president to have one more.
No, I just said a request. I just said I have a couple of minutes.
So, who takes up the lucky challenge?
Okay, if not.
But I want to say one thing to that. So the whole point of today is actually that what we would know, all of us would know more what's happening, what has been done in different countries. So the answer to the question that was posed to you, I believe, will be also much more clear by the end of today. And the idea is that we should be copying more of the best experiences and best solutions out there. But sir, thank you very much. I think you have put us to a very good footing today. Thank you.